Okay, so before you click off, I realize many of you probably aren't too keen to see this face for a full video. Trust me, neither am I, but if you've enjoyed my content long enough to stick around this far, why not humor me with this one-off, spoiler-free experiment, shall we say. It's still scripted like my usual videos, except presented more informally, which means you're likely going to start seeing me unraveling slowly into a ball of stress and anxiety as we go along, but screw it. My ulterior motive here is to feel more confident with my channel and feel less that my content is being dictated to appeasing some ambiguous algorithm. So for context and transparency, Universal sent me an early screener back in October for their then upcoming comedy horror Freaky, a quirky body swap slasher that pays homage to 80s, 90s horror and coming of age dramedies that, to my bewildered surprise, turned out to be both insanely fun, clever and remarkably wholesome. However, while it released in the US, the UK release got delayed until now, and so being in the UK, I couldn't make this video any sooner, even though I saw it like 8 months ago. God damn, time really flies these days. While Possessor was my favourite film of 2020, Freaky was by far the most entertaining because while we had this little pandemic thing going on, which meant that there was pretty slim pickings overall, this allowed Freaky to flourish as all the more satisfying to watch. I've talked a lot recently about how many people watch grim horror as this unorthodox means of escapism because living through bleak and brutal experiences that you can somewhat relate to from a safe position provides a catharsis and gratification that not many other genres can achieve, regardless of whether it's silly or serious. Although with that said, after some time, doing that can take a very negative toll on you, and as someone who covers horror movies week in, week out while relating them to my own feelings and experiences, I would be lying if I said in the last year I didn't feel like I hit a brick wall of burnout where I genuinely wanted to give up on all of this, even though I stubbornly persevere because I'm fueled by both caffeine and spite. So Freaky came at a good time for me because it was that healthy balance of levity I didn't realize I truly needed to reinvigorate my growing exhaustion for the genre. It's like I said in my Deep Rising video, everyone has their own horror comfort food, as it were. Horror movies that provide you with this giddy sense of nostalgic pleasure that remind you of why you fell in love with genre cinema to begin with, while still getting your fix of cinematic violence. Out of context, there is no way to make that not sound weird. Freaky is a welcome contrast to the typical self-serious horror we see these days, and while it was produced pre-pandemic, it's releasing during a time when horror could benefit from more empowering escapism in its purest, most sincere form. It tells the story of Millie, a reluctant, anxious teenager who swaps bodies with a local serial killer known as the Blissfield Butcher, and what ensues is less about just switching back or learning how this supernatural body swap mechanic works, and more about understanding Millie and relating to the turbulence of growing up. It's a story that you could say is more about unlocking your inner confidence by embracing discomfort and essentially giving a middle finger to those with stigmatizing expectations for how people are supposed to look, act, and feel. It's a bit of a paradox really, because while maintaining that classical killer edge, it has this uplifting message about being unafraid to discover who you want to be. Unless that involves being a serial killer, I don't think the film really recommends that. Now, Universal were kind enough to let me waste the time of its writer-director Christopher Landon, and if my interview with Lee Winnell and Jason Blum felt awkward, you can just imagine how I felt conducting this interview over my shitty Wi-Fi.
I like a newbie.
Oh, well good, then you can keep me right if when I horribly mess this up as we go along. It's ironic that I'm making a video about a movie that sends this positive message about, hey, just be confident with who you are, and yet I can't muster up the courage to watch my own interview footage. Holy shit, I suck at talking to people. So Chris Landon is a filmmaker I had no knowledge of prior to watching Freaky, and after watching his previous films, which include Happy Death Day and Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse, while he might not be reinventing the wheel or subverting genre expectations or whatever we say to make us sound smart, he reminds me in a good way of a nightmare John Hughes, who pioneered American coming-of-age cinema for both adults and adolescents. Put it this way, Happy Death Day is about a douchey college student learning to be humble through to perpetual death. Scout's Guide is about kids learning not to be stigmatized by their supposedly cringy childhood activities through a zombie apocalypse. And Freaky, like I said, is about being unafraid to unapologetically just be you, through the body of a serial killer played by Vince Vaughn. Naturally. On the surface, Freaky works perfectly as a silly, campy slasher with zany characters, but there's this poignant nostalgia that kicks in pretty quickly when you begin to realize how in touch it is with resembling social dynamics that we all experience throughout our lives that influence a large part of who we are.
Whenever I write something, I really start with character. And every time I try and explore, I think, some sort of aspect of my own life, or at least my past. And when I was in high school, I had my own identity struggles. I was very shy and introverted and codependent like Millie. I was a gay kid, closeted kid. It was really important to me to really shape her experience and her journey, and how this sort of crazy, mystical experience helps transform her, not just physically, but emotionally. And I think that's kind of the core of the movie, is watching this girl discover who she really is by being in somebody else's body.
I mean, that's basically the perfect description of my experience watching Freaky outside the lens of a humble slasher flick, if you can call it that. It encapsulates a sense of subtext I feel is prominent in most of Landon's recent films. It's about protagonists protecting the best of who they are and those they care the most about, and continuously remind them of who they are, while all the shitty people are the ones who are made to suffer.
And so a lot of what I put into my movies tend to sort of be a version of some kind of personal experience. I haven't body swapped with anybody yet. But I mean, like, for example, in the movie, Millie and Josh and Nyla, these like three best friends, well, I had that core group in high school, and we did eat lunch in a hallway, like away from everybody else, because we were misfits and we were different.
The whole idea of the Blissfield Butcher is that he's literally a soulless vessel who obtains a soul through an Aztec blade, and what we see is this breakdown of personality and superficiality, and seeing how what's on the inside matters so much more than how we perceive each other on the outside. It's hard to describe how surreal it is seeing how perfectly Vince Vaughn replicates Millie's personality while maintaining this intimidating presence that works so well for him in films like Brawl on Cell Block 99, whereas Catherine Newton contrasts her innocent appearance with this cold, menacing, and manipulative portrayal of the Butcher. It's really incredible how powerful the distinction between personality and appearance truly is. In a weird way, it's like the Khrushchev effect, where the relationship between two independent components changes how we perceive the same thing.
Vince, he's a very specific guy, and he checks all these boxes, that I had for this role. So he's physically intimidating, convincingly menacing. He's done some really serious work, especially in the last few years of his career. But then of course there's like the other Vince, which is comedic and charming. It's interesting because he is actually like two actors in one. And that's what I was looking for. And the same for Catherine. I worked with Catherine on Paranormal 4. There's a softness to her, and there's a shyness to her. But then on the flip side of the coin, she's highly competitive and laser focused. And so again, there was like two people hiding inside of her too. So they just came really equipped.
Now, as a horror movie, it seems to be going for this twisted sense of gratification as opposed to being overtly scary by, like I said earlier, making all the deaths come at the expense of those who either kinda deserve it or, let's be honest, you secretly or fuck it, openly want to see get killed. It sort of plays into this cultural transition in 80s slashers that indirectly made you root for the killer, because as the thrill of the kill became the main spectacle, victim characters who realistically we should be rooting for became increasingly flat and unlikable as demand to see the killer heightened, and we started applying a personality to a faceless antagonist. By the mid-80s, horror began to establish its name within popcorn flicks, and that's basically what Freaky aims to be, along with wonderfully realized heroes. In fact, it's quite refreshing to see a horror movie where it doesn't force in an emotional gut punch like killing off beloved characters, which became a trend that was popularized by The Walking Dead and Game of Thrones. Like, I agree that it has a distinct function, but to be honest, I think we're at a point where we're becoming numb to killing off beloved characters, and it's also become a little bit insultingly cheap when you think about it. Anyway, in drawing this bizarre nightmare to a close, I want to start by saying thank you to anyone who made it this far and enjoyed the content up to this point. I'm considering this a little breather in between videos. I do have a bigger topic releasing in a couple of days that I hope serves as me putting a pin in talking about isolation just for a while, because this pandemic, I think we're sick of talking about it, aren't we? Secondly, as deeply out of my comfort zone as I am, I hope this video goes in some way to showing that horror can have a positive and provide its own psychological boost rather than just constant doom and gloom. In the comments below, let me know your positive horror comfort food, and until next time, stay safe, don't swap bodies with a serial killer, and I'll see you all in a few days. Bye.